See, her great teaching is that grace is nothing but the presence of God. It's not graces of things you get. Grace is literally the name of God. It's the presence of God, that God permeates every element of life. The things we think are holy, the things are wonderful and ecstatic, the darkness, the emptiness, God permeates it all. Her great teaching is everything is grace. And so that's why her big teaching to us is be present to life. God is present in everything. The stuff you enjoy, the ecstasies you enjoy, the things that excite you, the things that hurt you, the things that threaten you, the things that empty you, the things that get you worried. God is there. Hello, I'm Bob Colorisi. I've been a Carmelite for 64 years since I made my vows, and I've been a priest for 58 years right now. And I want to talk to you today about one of the great experiences, one of the great saints of the Carmelite tradition that I'm part of. 800 years of an incredible spirituality about presence. Carmelite spirituality is always often darkness seeking light, and that's a peace. Probably the best one of all of them in many ways is Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower. I knew her as a child. She was part of our life. When I was growing up, I was born in 41, but during the 40s and 50s, I had a grandmother named after her on my dad's side, my dad's mother, my grandmother there. And Teresa, my other one, had a picture of her. She looked rather simpy, to be honest with you. I never thought much about her. There was a place in the church. But then when I went to, and then it was one of the stained glass windows was her. So it seemed like she was big, but I didn't know what she was about. But people seemed to know her a lot. So when I was in novitiate, I did join the Carmelites. And in novitiate, I read her Story of the Soul. I thought she was absolutely crazy. This is a hypersensitive, over-emotional girl. She needs to shrink. I couldn't believe it. It was funny. But when I was turning 50, after many years in different ministries, the Carmelites, I was asked to take over the Society Little Flower. And I had a little discussion with our provincial at the time and saying, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do retreat work and stuff. And the last thing I said to him was, I don't even like her. And he looked at me and said, well, learn to. And it was a great experience in my life. So she taught me a lot. She's a ninth child of a couple who really both wanted to be religious. Remember, they live in a time of Jansenism. And Jansenism there's a really angry and pissed off God that you're never going to keep happy anyway. And so you got to keep the rules. You got to be perfect. Louis and Zélie, somebody sets them up in a blind date. They're living in Alençon, France. And she looks and he seems like a nice guy. And eventually they date. 3 months they're engaged, and 6 months they're married. Well, the issue was one of the funny pieces about them as a couple is, that they didn't. About 11 months into it, she used to go to her spiritual director a lot. At one point, he said, "You consummated the marriage, didn't you?" And she, "Oh no, we're not having sex." Because remember, Jansenism would ultimately say if it feels good, it's probably wrong. That kind of stuff, and. So he said, well, you better consummate that marriage. Well, they did, and they ultimately had 9 kids. 5 of them will live to adulthood. 3 of them died very early, and, like in the first 2 or 3 months. That was very common in those days. And one of them lived to 5 years old, one of the girls. So 2 boys and 2 girls ultimately died young, but one was 5. And one of the interesting pieces about it, when Zélie was pregnant with Thérèse in her womb, that's when they lost the child that was 5. So the mom was living in trauma, through that whole thing. And then she also had breast cancer. So there's lots of issues going on in her. So, but Thérèse is born into that. And what's interesting, she's born on January 2nd. She's like a Capricorn in 1873. 2 days later, the mom had gone to Lourdes at the time, which was close, because of this breast cancer issue. And she never got cured. But they had the statue, which was Mary Victorious, and she had it in her family, and they were always praying to it. So the day of her baptism, which was January 4th, 1873, she dedicated this baby, Thérèse, to Our Lady of Mary Victorious. And somewhere in early March, she got up in the middle of the night, the baby, she was born, she seemed precocious, she seemed really intelligent, there was something restless about her, but she wasn't getting healthy because she couldn't breastfeed him. So she did what she had done before, but in the middle of the night at this point, she goes and walks 7 kilometers outside to Rose Taillé out in the farm, 7 kilometers away. That took her about 2 hours to get there. And she had used Rose Taillé, who's got a big farm, a big thing, big-breasted woman who could become the nursing mother to her. So for the next 13 to 14 months, Thérèse is being brought up out in this farm 7 kilometers away. They only saw her parents on Thursdays when they came in to get provisions, and even the mom said, she's more attached to those people than us, the little snob about her. And because she loved it out there. Thérèse, it was something fresh. But she's growing up in her formative years, but missing her biological mother. Because babies miss them. They were inside them and they can smell them. And okay, so she's out there. Now she's got her second mother, Rose Taillé. Eventually, Pauline starts talking about becoming a nun, a Carmelite nun. About a mile away from their house in Lisieux, there was a Carmelite convent. It was outside the town. They had visited there sometimes. The dad would take them. He was very pious. And so we're there. But she was talking about it. So they had this big celebration. They had a big dinner that night celebrating. Pauline's going to become a Carmelite nun, and the 2 girls were now going to be homeschooled at the Benedictine school. They get them more socialized. They thought that was a good idea. And so they went to Mass, and then Pauline goes one way. They take the girls the other way. And, of course, Thérèse is there. Well, when she comes home, and where's Pauline? Well, she doesn't live here anymore. What do you mean she doesn't live here anymore? She became a nun. Yeah. No, she lives with them. We can't go only see her on Thursday. She gets hysterical. See, her mother, her big issue is mother loss. She needed that mothering presence. And that's how God had to work in her life, is to become present, but present especially to the pain. And eventually, so then it goes through 9 months of this hissy thing. And they even go up to the convent on Thursdays when they can meet at 2, and all of them are there. Pauline's behind the screen, and they're all, what's the food like? What's it like? What's it like? And Pauline hardly noticed her. So they were trying to treat her with this. She broke out in hives. She was angry. She didn't want, I don't want you. I want Pauline. When you get obsessed about something, it becomes a total preoccupation. And she even writes in her story later about how mean she was. She went, I don't need you. I need Pauline. I believe Pauline. And it was awful. And Pauline tried to meet her sometimes, had her come up on those Thursdays, and she tried, but she couldn't get, I need you here, and you're not here for me, and this thing. And it went on for 9 months. That had started in October. Well, in mid-May in the next year, when it was there, and they pretty well given up on her. She seemed to want to die. The doctors gave up on her. But anyway, they were praying, obviously, to the statue of Mary Victorious. And it was Pentecost Sunday. It was May 13th that year. And they were praying, and suddenly she looks up, and that statue smiles at her. Now, statues don't smile. It's made of a kind of marble substance, But she gets up, and she seems normal, and suddenly all this hissy fit, and oh my God. So anyway, then they go, this is an important piece of it. And then, so they send somebody up to the convent because Pauline is there, and said, okay, and the nuns have been praying for her, so bring her up. So they rush her up to the convent, and Pauline's there, and all the nuns come out, and they're all behind the grill. And Pauline said, what happened? She smiled at me. She was so excited, and somehow she felt healed. And I felt something transform my soul. Sometimes we all have those experiences. Now, what she's looking for, like any of us, confirmation and affirmation of her experience. So Pauline who always pushed her, are you sure what's happened? Is this something else you've been hallucinating before? And she said, I don't know. All I know is she smiled at me, and it was like, I just feel more alive. She was there. So Pauline's kind of trying, you sure? So she had to walk away, and this becomes an important piece for all of us. She had to walk away from it to trust an experience of God as the divine feminine, because God was going to meet her and heal her to what she needed, which was a mother wound. And somehow I'll never leave you. And she could trust it was there without the affirmation she wanted and the confirmation she needed from people she trusted. And that's important because many of us dismiss those moments when God breaks out, this mystical kind of thing. That's one point. The next thing probably is very important. If you ever come to the museum in Darien, there's a wood carving, and there's a piece there that nobody seems to understand. But the dad had moved there. He had sold the business, because they were wealthy. And his wife had run this small group of women, about 20 women, were hired to make Alençon lace. Well, anyway, so he's out fishing and she gets bored, so she walks away. The girls were trained, and he really loved Thérèse. She commanded attention anyway, and she saw her value as being seen and noticed, being noticed. So anyway, she's walking around by this thing. She goes off the beaten path, and the dad's fishing, and she's bored. So suddenly she sees this beautiful plant, this flower, and like, wow! And she's looking at how beautiful. They were trained to be sensitive to nature and beauty. Nature is the first revelation of God. So she's looking at it, but then after a while she's saying, what a waste. If I hadn't gone here, nobody would see it. And she's thinking, maybe I should cut it and put it out so people could see it. Like, it would only have value if it was seen by others. And this is an interesting piece of trusting the mystical experience, the way God comes into our life. That divine presence always present. And so she stays with it long enough, and eventually that beautiful plant taught her, I give glory to God by being, not by being seen. We all think it's about us doing things, making the presence. It's our very being reflects the glory of God. And that's a huge part of religion, and it's a huge part of spirituality. It's God who saves us. It's God who gives us our value. And we're always seen by God, and she needed that. But so she's learning this thing. It's somehow not about my needs or what I think is important and value. Your value comes from being a child of God. We're all made in the image and likeness of God, and she really learned that. And she had to learn to do that because she was very spoiled in a lot of ways. Think it's all about me and stuff. And then Marie will eventually, the oldest sister will go in the convent, so two of them are gone. And Thérèse gets in this thing, I want to become a nun. And well, she goes to the superior. Well, remember, they had seen her all those months. That this little brat screaming, yelling, and says, well, when you grow up. This is an interesting thing about how do we find our vocation in life. So pats her on the head and says, when you grow up, if you grow up, and if God wills. Well, she hated that. What do I do next? So she goes to the Carmelite chaplain there, and explaining she's feeling called by God to be a Carmelite nun, especially because like Pauline and stuff. And it's all part of it, the way God works in our life. And so she goes to, and he started listening. Well, that's okay. That's good. That's wonderful. Stay with it. But you're a little young. If God wills, it'll happen. Pats her on the head. Well, she's getting a little frustrated, because she likes her way. And then where do I go next? Well, this was jumping. Well, her dad, because they had money, they had just renovated the cathedral in Lisieux, and he had donated the main altar. So he was a major donor there. So he had connections with the diocese. So he takes her to meet the bishop. It's a November day. She's great. She puts her hair up to look older, and she's explaining to the bishop, that how she really feels this call, and blah, blah, blah. So she's trying to look old. She's looking older, but she's only like 14, And their minimum age, I think, at that point was 18 to get in. They took people at 16 if they had to. Anyway, so she goes in there, and the bishop's talking. Oh, that's nice. I'll look into it. But what do they say, Mother Superior? Well, and he does the same thing. Pats her on the head. If God wills. And she's like, wait a minute. Well, you can make it happen. You're the bishop, Okay. Then the other piece is there's a Pope, Pius IX. He's in Rome. He's a pope during a lot of the stuff, the infallibility issue stuff. Anyway, it's his 50th anniversary as a bishop, not Bishop of Rome, but he was about 12 years he's a bishop of Rome. So there's the diocesan pilgrimage there, and he takes the last two girls, Celine and Thérèse. The dad does. And so they're there, and they're going to have a private audience, not the big one. They're going to pray, and they're all playing about it. If you ever get them, interesting, and they tell you the protocol, and you just kneel, you don't touch them, you just let him touch you or whatever, or kiss his ring and stuff. And so but Thérèse is saying, oh, this is like the top. This is the Vicar of Christ, So they go in, and so they're there, and Celine is saying to her, go for it if you want to do it. So they get put in, and then what you do I've been there twice with the individual thing. They present you, and you go and you kneel down. Well, she kneels down, and she puts her hand on the Pope, and he's really old. This is why I think people like her. She goes to the top. So she puts her hands, and Holy Father, I want to become a Carmelite. And he's going, he's rattling, and he's looking back, and he's looking, and so the Monsignors are saying, because she was rattling, and said, Holy Father, she wants to become a nun and she thinks you can help it. So she intervenes and says, yeah, Holy Father, if in honor of your Jubilee, they'll let me in early, blah, 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 blah. And he does the same thing, puts his hand on her and says, if God wills. So you get that same put off. And then they actually pick her up and drag her away. See, she always went to the top. And I think that's why people go to her. She somehow gets things done. But she's driven about it, she wants to get away. So, and then she goes to the back, but she's really frustrated. She's got the same answer. Well, she only gets in. Well, the nuns they're all meeting. She wants to go. So they finally let her in. And of course, Pauline and Maria are already inside the convent. So they do let her in, and then she gets in there, and the dad is really weeping. He's losing his beloved little daughter, my little queen. And there's a beautiful scene about that as he prays over her when she's going in. And then she gets in there, and she had dreamed about it. You know how you romanticize something, what marriage is going to be like, what religious life's going to be like being a teacher is going to be like, whatever our vocations are. She gets in there, and it wasn't what she imagined. She was living with 20 women, and several of them didn't like her because they had heard her as a kid, and they thought she was way too simple and a spoiled brat. They heard all that. So they didn't really care for her. And yet she was fun. She finally had to develop the thing. This is where God wants me. I got to be here. Be where you're planted. How to be present to life as it comes to you, with even the choices you make and the circumstances that get you there. And that's a huge piece of spiritual. How to be present to life. Some of us sleepwalk through life. We're missing what's really going on within us and around us and what God is doing. So she's there, and it's kind of an interesting experience there. But she has to learn to deal with that, this whole thing. But then as she's going on, and then she had servants, and it was a self-contained monastery. So they planted their own stuff, they harvested everything, had to clean everything. She didn't know how to clean even. When one of the nuns who didn't like her, looked at one about the chapel, and there was a little cobweb she had missed, and really put her down. So she had to understand. Do you want me here, God? But she was really developing a real personal relationship. She didn't always like all that community prayer. She didn't like the rosary. There was a nun behind her who was cracking her teeth through every time, and she was going to turn around and slap her. And then she says, well, maybe it's a symphony from God. So she turned that clacking sound into a symphony. See, she could transform life. The way she began to understand it, receive it. And it was interesting. And then there's they eventually even made her novice mistress, in some ways assistant novice mistress, because she was a good teacher. There was something they knew, that she was very articulate. She was a great storyteller. She was a mimic. So many of the pictures of her make her look serious, deadly serious. So that's through Jansenism. But she was a great storyteller. And on every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8, they got together for communion. That's one time they could talk to each other. And they loved it when she was there because she would tell stories. Remember, she's the one that wrote the plays when they were celebrating. There was this creative, lively part of her, that doesn't show up a lot in her statues and pictures. She looks very, overly serious sometimes. But it was there. But eventually, so there was a lot of different things going on there. But eventually, toward the end, but she had TB. TB was a huge, and they called it consumption. 4 nuns died while she was there of this consumption, or we'd call tuberculosis today. And, she had it, and it came and went. Well, eventually, but she's up there, and she's novice mistress, so she's teaching, and that's where her little way comes from. When you had to teach, she had to write down and explain, here's how to pray. Well, the nuns didn't think she was doing it well. They thought the only reason for religious life was to avoid hell. Not the divine presence. She's teaching them how to respond to someone who's present to you all the time and always there with you and loving you. And they thought that was there. She wasn't stressing enough the devil and the hell and all that stuff, and that's why they said, well, she's too simple. She doesn't get it. And anyway, so she's going through it. But also at some point, those dark nights that happen in life, the things that excite you no longer do. And it's what John of the Cross taught us. She's very much like St. John of the Cross, dealing with dark nights. And suddenly the absence comes in. Now, here's somebody who lived on presence. She needed to be noticed one way or another, positive or negative attention. But somehow that was important to her because that was her need. She's a special. That was her need as an Enneagram 4. And, is there, but so she was writing off that. Well, suddenly there's this absence feeling. Okay. We all go through times when things are absent, and God is absent. I know I've been through some mythical things. Where did you go? Where did you go? Sometimes you feel that presence and it's energizing, and it's that spark is in you, the divine spark. Sometimes it seems to be gone. So she's going through it. In fact, the last 18 months of her life, she's going to go through that purification of trusting God when you don't get the consolation about it. A lot of us pray to feel close to God, and he said it's gone. So she had to deal with that. Plus the tuberculosis is coming back, and eventually, one day, they watched her after evening prayer, and the thing had gotten more. Well, first of all, the other piece was, one day she went into their community thing, and there was two nuns looking at her, and they saw, oh my God, she's looking awful again. She's getting that Dachau look. And the one nun says to the other, what are we going to say about her when she dies? Because she's so simple. Now, in the meantime, her cousin, the grandgirl, was a novice, and she had heard him. So she hears them making that candy comment. What are we going to say about her? She's so damn simple. And so she goes to, Pauline is now the prioress of the convent. And so she goes to Pauline and says, you know what they're saying about her? And blah, 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 blah. So Pauline does something really interesting. So Pauline says, I'll take care of it. She always did. And so she goes to her about 2 weeks later and says, you know what? You're such a creative writer and stuff. I want you to write down what's been going on in your life. Now, her Christmas conversion was, that Jesus saying, get over yourself. It's not about you. When she had gone to the baby Jesus, I want to be wholehearted. If you remember, she wanted it all. I want to be wholehearted, nothing by half means and stuff. And so, and then she goes home, and of course she, this is a kind of intersection in there, but she's going to be 12 going on 13. It's halfway through her life. And so she goes home, and of course what kids do is they come in there and they put out their shoes and Father Christmas with the stuff there. And she goes, I can't wait to see what I'm going to get. And the dad says, oh my God, when are you growing up? And she gets hysterical again. She was still vulnerable with this whole thing, that basic need, that basic wound she had. So she's running upstairs crying, and Celine's saying, oh my God, she's going to ruin another meal. Here she is back again. But she has an experience. It's not an apparition, an experience of Jesus saying, this would be in English translation, Thérèse, get over yourself. It's not about you. See, because we all think it's all about me and what I'm doing. It's that whole thing about being as opposed to doing. We're human beings, not human doings. But, we all think our salvation depends on what we do. And it's all about what God does in and through us. So that's an important thing. And so that was one piece of it. So now she's walking in, and this nun's. So Pauline, says, okay, I'll get her to write something up. So she does. And what does she say? No, it's not about me. That's going to make me so self-focused if I start writing about it. She said, I just want you to do it. So she backs off, and won't do it. So 2 weeks later, Pauline goes back to her and says, look, I'm not talking to you with your older sister. I'm talking about superior. I'm going to tell you under obedience. I want you to write what's going on in you. And Thérèse is, she's sharp, but she's thinking, and she says, no, I can't do that because it'll make me all about me. But she said, I will write about the mercy of God. So then, one night, and it was in July of 1897, she couldn't make the stairs. She literally was walking up there, and they couldn't breathe. And they realized it was bad. Her room was on the second floor, and they watched her. And so eventually, the next day, took her to the infirmary. Realized she needed help. And it was they put the infirmary on the other side of the building because it was contagious. So they put her there, and what they did in the process of taking her stuff down there, and she kind of knew it was the beginning of the end, is they found these 3 manuscripts. I know what they look like. We know when we were in college, you had those blue books and you wrote all the answers in it. Well, there were 3 of them there she had written. Manuscript A, B, and C. And so the nun so she gives her Pauline, who kind of is distraught. She's losing her beloved sister, and so Pauline take her down there, and Pauline throws it on her desk. But she's also there's this empty time. So then she's in the infirmary. She's isolated there. The sheets around her bed, which in our place is like you're either white or blue, they were black. So she was surrounded by darkness, there. And when they'd come to see her and different things, but she was funny, and she was really going through a dark time. At one point she even tells them to get rid of the medication because she was going to take it just to put herself out of the misery. But she's trying to trust God in this whole thing. Well, anyway, the priest came. They didn't have daily mass in those days, but the priest came, a chaplain came and gave him communion 3 days a week. So he came in there, gave her communion. Well, about the third week, about the 8th time she got to give him, and she spit it up, and he said, "No more. We can't have Jesus messed up in human vomit." So like to her, normally she'd get into a hissy fit about that, because that was the last sign she had that God was still reaching out to her. And but then she reflects enough about it, and that's where you can see where God was working in her. And she said, "Well, it's a grace to receive the sacrament because you're with me. It's also a grace not to receive the sacrament because now my longing for you is even more because everything is grace." See, her great teaching is that grace is nothing but the presence of God. It's not graces of things you get. Grace is literally the name of God. It's the presence of God, that God permeates every element of life. She was very aware of her imperfections, her need to be noticed and doing things so people would appreciate her more and that stuff. God had to let her go, teach her how to let go of that. Get over yourself. It's not about you. And so this whole thing about, she does a spirituality of imperfection. Because our imperfection is where God comes in. Most of the time we take a lot of credit for, I got to do this right and it's perfect, Well, God doesn't expect perfection. He wants wholeness. He wants you to be the whole person you are in a connection with the whole universe and everything. And so she had to learn that. And she talks about that God accepts my imperfection. Because, it's that song that I forgot who wrote it. But, there's cracks in everything because that's where the light comes in or gets out. And that's what she experienced. She didn't use that language. But she realized that's where God actually works in our imperfection, that he accepted us, not rejected us because of imperfection. So there's a wonderful thing. And I think that's why there's a popularity. We all know we're flawed in some ways. There's things of us that are dysfunctional or didn't work right, or whether it's from our childhood stuff people did, or with things that happened to us in life, or some of the choices we made. And there's a kind of an imperfection in it, or there's some need, it's about me, and somehow that God loves us and accepts it. So I think we have to learn that, see that presence. So it's the permeating presence of God, that all is grace. That is her greatest gift of all of it.